Every year there are these 1 or 2 anime I never heard anything about or had any knowledge of the source material before watching them, and then they completely overwhelm me with their story or animation or even musical quality, and I just sit there and feel happy to experience something like this every once in a while. I actively try to avoid as much as possible about any new anime in the first place, so I don't watch any trailers aside from some anime where I've already read the source material and I'm just interested to see how they try to adapt their original work, like with Chainsaw Man for example. But aside from these few exceptions, I try to know as little as possible before starting a new anime. Now of course, it's not that easy to avoid everything when it comes to a new anime most of the time. I mean, there are multiple cases where you just need to be in the anime community in a very small way, and that'll already be more than enough and make it basically impossible to avoid any information about new anime, like with cases like Chainsaw Man again, or Oshinoko for example. Even if you try to avoid any information about these two before they're released, it was already enough to watch anime at all the weeks preceding their release, and you would have gotten at least some kind of information, whether you wanted it or not, and don't get me started on after they released their first few episodes. If you watched anime at that time, you probably heard someone mention these two, and it's the same with so many other anime. I mean, I'm pretty sure many paid little to no attention to Mashle's first season, but once season 2 was released, even if you had absolutely no interest in the anime at all, you more than likely heard the opening somewhere and learned about the basic premise of the story. Now, what I'm trying to say is that the enjoyment you get out of any story, and in this case anime, probably won't change by much by just simply knowing the premise of the story, or after seeing one spoiler-free trailer or anything like that. I heard about the manga for Frieren, but that didn't change much about my enjoyment of the anime. I mean, why should it in most cases? As long as you don't get spoiled too much before experiencing any new story, you are basically blind when starting it, so you still can enjoy everything for the first time and have a great time doing so. Having said that though, and after indirectly reminding myself to continue Frieren, I still really value the experience of not knowing anything about the new anime or manga or even story-based game, not knowing if it's good or bad or what the story is about, aside from some basic predictions based off the title alone, and just go into something new completely blind and possibly be surprised by how good the anime or manga or game turns out to be. Of course, having this experience is way harder for anything not relatively new, so the older the game, or anime, or manga is, naturally the more information will be widely available already, and it's most of the time more difficult to experience these kind of stories completely blind compared to anything brand new. Like, I'm sure even if you haven't seen Fullmetal Alchemist, Attack on Titan, or Demon Slayer yet, and you've been in the anime community for at least some time, it'll be almost impossible to know absolutely nothing about these titles and start them completely blind now. And since anime, or manga, or games that turn out to be really good and to be praised by those who experience them, it's way harder to find good stories that you have no prior knowledge of, especially after being in any kind of community for a while. So I always appreciate it when something new releases, where maybe only those few familiar with the source material, or if there is none, then nobody at all sing their praises, so it's easier for anyone to avoid information and truly know nothing about what they are about to experience. These experiences where you know absolutely nothing about the story or its perception by others prior and then start something new, oftentimes leave a lasting impression on me, and I truly value them. Just some that come to mind, but I had this sort of experience over the last few years with some manga, games, and of course anime like Apothecary or Bocce the Rock, of course while it was releasing, because now it'll probably be way harder to avoid any information about Bocce with all the memes and music around. And the anime that I knew absolutely nothing about and amazed me in 2023 and continued to this year was of course Apothecary Diaries. I knew nothing about the anime before starting it, and I'm sure many had a similar experience. I used to do this more, but I still semi-regularly look up what new anime released next season, and if the cover and title look at least somewhat interesting, then I probably add them to my watch list and try to avoid any more information like a description or trailer, and just watch the first few episodes when they release. I'm not sure if it was quite the same with Apothecary Diaries for me, or if I just saw the cover for the anime after the first few episodes were released and decided to start it, but whatever way got me there, I'm glad I started the anime. Now granted, I haven't finished Frieren yet, so I can't be sure, but at least so far, I can safely say that Apothecary Diaries is my favorite newer anime, and I think a lot of what makes this anime so special is thanks to its protagonist Maomao. Apothecary Diaries has a lot of unique and interesting ways of approaching different areas like setting, themes, story structure, or even music, but what I think makes it stand out far more than any of those aspects is Maomao and her way of dealing with everything. I watched and talked about many anime with more of an ensemble cast of characters recently, or at least anime and manga that, while having one clearly defined main character, still have an almost equal amount of screen time on lots of different characters. And while Apothecary Diaries certainly has other important characters with various amounts of screen time like Jinchi, Maomao is clearly the star of the story and the one character that everything ultimately revolves around. I think one of the things that's great about her is that she has this presence that just forces you to watch what she'll do next. One thing I'm not the biggest fan of with a lot of anime, and I'm not saying this has to be something bad, but it oftentimes just isn't that interesting, is when the main protagonist is someone who's already not that interesting by themselves, and then additionally also gets pushed around by the plot and other characters to the point that you might want to watch other more interesting characters instead of the protagonist, and this oftentimes can hurt my enjoyment of a series. I recently talked about Bungo Stray Dogs, and while I really appreciate it and like its main character Atsushi now, I think he's far less interesting than most of the characters around him, and for most of the plot gets pushed around and is more passive when compared to other characters in the story. And while these two aspects certainly don't have to be anything bad, when put together they can create a character, and especially a main character, that serves as more of a point of view into the story, and less of a character who's interesting just by themselves. Characters that are just not that interesting are one thing, but protagonists who have a more passive role in the overall story can be really unique when written in a certain way. I think it's way harder to make a protagonist who's mostly passive in the story and just reacts to everything happening around them and doesn't really take action first like Shinji interesting than a protagonist who goes out there trying to confront problems and take action first before it could come back to bite them in the ass like Lelouch. I don't think there's anything wrong with having more passive protagonists. I mean, Shinji is perfect for Evangelion, and I definitely don't think he's not interesting. I just think having a really memorable main character is way easier for stories where the protagonist leads the direction they go in more than anyone else, like with Code Geass. I don't remember where I heard this, probably in some YouTube video, but I once heard someone describe Eren as an active protagonist forced into the role of a passive one by the overwhelming circumstances and world around him, where he is forced to react to what is happening around him all the time and just rarely gets the chance to be that active protagonist he could be otherwise. And I think that's an interesting viewpoint and would also be in line with this different, more active approach to the problems he's faced with later on. And while it certainly isn't that easy to put every character or protagonist into one of these boxes, I think Maomao is in a similar situation to Eren in that regard. If you haven't seen Apothecary Diaries, this happens in the first few minutes of the anime, but if you would like to still go into the anime without knowing anything specific, then now would be the best time to stop the video. But for everyone who stayed, Maomao gets kidnapped at the start of the story and is forced to work at the Imperial Palace and basically put into a position where she has to do what all kinds of different people, mostly once part of the inner palace, want from her if she wants to live. And I think at least in that regard, her situation is somewhat similar to Eren's. She's also trapped in an environment she can't escape and has to react to others' actions if she wants to survive. Now, of course, her situation isn't as much life or death as Eren's in Attack on Titan, but I do think that she's someone who acts more active when given the chance, and you can see this at the start of the story before she's kidnapped, even though she already has other people wanting her to do something for them, and later on, whenever she isn't tasked with anything too serious and exhausting. And I mean, it's obvious throughout the anime that Maomao is someone who seeks out new things all the time when given the chance, and even if not, she'll probably find a way to keep things interesting for her somehow. I also think it shows how good of a protagonist Maomao is when she's in such a complex and unique setting with multiple people plotting to harm one another and all kinds of intrigues going on around her, and still manages to be the most fascinating part of the story. I think she truly stands out among the main characters in recent anime, and there's just so much to her. She's of course already interesting just by her personality alone, but the circumstances in which she has to work with her knowledge and solve all kinds of different problems, from murders over mysterious diseases up to hardships caused by different societal positions, is just so fascinating and something I haven't seen in that combination in any other anime so far. That's also something I really appreciate about the Apothecary Diaries. It doesn't shy away from any realistic and common problems people in this time era and setting have to endure. The story and Maomao most of the time have a mature way of addressing different issues, not unusual for this sort of setting. There's discrimination based on one's different social standing, people scheming to gain any advantage they can on others, regardless of the harm they'll do to innocent people in the process, and everything regarding the Red Light District and its inhabitants and their complex lives. And I think it's great to have this anime that, while still being funny and fun a lot of the time, shows these situations you might not be seeing in that many other anime. And like I said, I think a lot of this works due to Maomao's way of confronting a problem. Sometimes it's also better to not get in the way and protect other people by not telling what she might have found out, and I think she's almost perfect in her way of dealing with these situations. There are multiple episodes and moments I didn't expect to hit me as hard as they did, and I think their characters and story in Apothecary Diaries are something very unique that I honestly can't wait to see more of. Like the last video, this is again all over the place, and I just wanted to talk about the Apothecary Diaries, so I didn't have much planned for how to approach this video. But anyway, I wish you a great rest of the day, and bye.